My son-in-law's father stood in the middle of my kitchen. He casually cracked open a can of beer, took a slow sip, and smiled at me as if he already owned the place. Sooner or later, this cabin is going to belong to my family anyway. I didn't say a word, because there was one thing I knew better than anyone else in that room. A key can open a door, but it can never grant ownership. Life doesn't hand over a lifetime of hard work to someone simply because they walked in using someone else's key. By the time my son-in-law's father finally understood that, the sheriff's cruiser had already pulled into the driveway. And his name was already being written into a trespassing report. My name is Dennis Colby. I'm 68, born in Wisconsin, and I spent 36 years running an electrical supply company outside Green Bay before I sold it and started waking up without an alarm clock. I have one daughter, Nora. She's 34, smart in a way that makes people underestimate her right up until it costs them, and she has her mother's exact habit of going quiet when she's thinking hard about something. My wife Marjorie passed 6 years ago. Cancer. I won't dress that up. Some things don't need decoration. If you've ever watched something sacred to someone you loved get treated like a convenience by people who never understood what it meant, you already know the particular cold that settled into me that day. Stay with me tonight, because what happened over the following weeks changed how I understood my own family completely. Marjorie loved one place in this world more than anywhere else. A small cedar-sided cabin on Lake Owen, up near Hayward, about 3 hours north of our house. We bought it back in 1998, when Nora was still losing baby teeth and I was still working Saturdays. It wasn't fancy then. The dock leaned. The kitchen floor dipped near the sink. Every window stuck shut in July. But Marjorie walked through it once, looked out over that blue water, and said, "This place feels like it's waiting for us." So I bought it. Over the years, I rebuilt the dock myself, replaced the windows, added a screened porch, and put in a stone fireplace that took me 2 full summers, because I was too stubborn to hire the mason my brother kept recommending. Marjorie made it a home. She hung quilts over the porch railing, planted lavender along the front steps, and kept a blue ceramic cookie jar on the kitchen counter, even when there weren't any cookies in it. "A kitchen without a cookie jar," she used to say, "looks like nobody's expected." After she died, I didn't go up there much for a while. The quiet was too loud. Slowly I started going back, opening the windows, sweeping the porch, sitting in Marjorie's rocker facing the water, feeling sad in a way that was clean instead of crushing. That spring I decided to restore the place properly. New dock boards, updated wiring, fresh paint, safer steps down to the water, not to sell it, never that. I wanted it ready for Nora's future children, if she and Grant ever had any. I wanted it kept in the family but protected. I wanted everything Marjorie and I built to outlive both of us, without ever becoming bait for somebody else's greed. Nora had married Grant Sutter 2 years earlier. Grant was a decent man, a little soft around his parents, but decent. He worked in medical device sales, said please to waitresses, and called me sir until I told him, for the 5th time, that Dennis would do fine. His parents, Roy and Sheila Sutter, lived outside Peoria, Illinois. Roy had owned 3 businesses and blamed somebody else for the failure of every one of them. Sheila smiled with only her mouth. Some people do that. You can see it, if you're paying attention. I never disliked them exactly. I just never trusted the way Roy looked at things he didn't own. The trouble started on a Tuesday in May. I'd driven up to the cabin to meet a carpenter named Aldo who was supposed to look at the dock railing at 1 o'clock. I remember the time because I'd stopped at a diner near Cadillac for coffee and eggs, and the waitress told me I had plenty of time if I didn't drive like somebody's grandfather. I told her I was somebody's grandfather in training. She laughed. I tipped her well. It was one of those days that looks gentle right up until the wind comes off the water and reminds you who's actually in charge. Blue sky, hard light, pine shadows crossing the road. I was in a good mood. I had a folder of estimates on the passenger seat, a grocery bag with 2 sandwiches, and a can of Marjorie's favorite lemon oil, because I planned to polish her old cedar chest while I was up there. I turned onto the gravel lane at 12:38. The first thing I saw was the gate standing open. Not broken. Open. Then tire marks in the damp gravel, fresh, wide, the kind a trailer leaves behind. I slowed before the bend, and when the cabin finally came into view, my hands tightened on the wheel. 4 vehicles sat in my driveway. A black SUV I recognized immediately as Roy's. A white minivan. a red pickup with Illinois plates. And backed up near the side porch, a small U-Haul trailer with its rear door hanging open. My dock boards were stacked neatly where Aldo had dropped them off the week before, but somebody had already moved my porch furniture out onto the lawn. Smoke rose from my grill. Music drifted out of the cabin, not loud, just comfortable. The kind of volume people use when they believe they have a right to be exactly where they are. I sat there for maybe 10 seconds. That's one thing age gives you. You learn not to run straight into every fire. You look first, you count, you breathe. Then you decide whether it's a fire or a trap. I turned off the truck, grabbed my phone from the cup holder, and walked up the gravel. The front door stood open. I stepped inside my own cabin and found Roy Sutter standing in my kitchen with a beer in one hand, wearing boat shoes on Marjorie's braided rug. Sheila was over at my pantry, moving cans from one shelf to another, like she was organizing a place she'd already claimed as hers. Grant's younger brother, Kyle, was carrying a cardboard box labeled Lake Room down the hallway. Two women I'd never met sat at my table eating potato salad out of a plastic tub. A teenage boy was sprawled across my sofa, sneakers still on the cushions. And out on the screened porch, beside the window overlooking the lake, Marjorie's rocker had been shoved aside so somebody could set up a folding card table. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Roy turned, saw me, and grinned. Not embarrassed, not startled, grinned. "Dennis," he said, spreading his arms wide like I'd just shown up late to his barbecue. "You made good time." I looked at the U-Haul boxes. I looked at Sheila's hands still in my pantry. I looked at the muddy sneaker prints on the floor Marjorie used to mop twice over before guests ever arrived. Then I looked back at Roy. "What are you doing in my cabin?" Sheila closed the pantry door slowly, like I'd just interrupted something private. Roy chuckled. "Relax. Grant gave us the code. We were just getting things set up." "Set up for what?" "For summer," he said. "Family should use family places. You know how it is." I took one step further into the kitchen. "This isn't your family place." That's when Sheila sighed, soft and annoyed, like I was being difficult over dinner napkins. "Dennis," she said, "Nora's your only child. Grant's her husband. One day this becomes theirs anyway. We're not strangers." The teenage boy on my sofa laughed under his breath. Roy raised his beer toward the lake. "Exactly, no need to make this awkward. We figured we'd start bringing a few things up now. Save everyone the trouble later. I've been angry in my life. I've slammed doors. I've said things I regretted. I've stood in hospital hallways and hated God for not answering fast enough. But standing in that cabin, watching a man hold a beer in my kitchen while his wife rearranged my dead wife's pantry, I felt something colder than anger. I felt the switch inside me flip from hurt over to record. I took out my phone. Roy's smile thinned. "Who are you calling?" I looked him dead in the eye. "The sheriff." That got the room quiet fast. Sheila's face changed first. Kyle stopped moving, box still in his hands. One of the women at the table set her fork down. Roy laughed, short and thin, with a lot less air in it than before. "Come on, Dennis. Don't be ridiculous." I pressed the call button. When the dispatcher answered, I gave my name, the address, and said clearly, "There are unauthorized people inside my property." They entered using a code I never gave them. "They've brought moving boxes and a trailer. I want a deputy out here, and I want a trespass report filed." Roy set his beer down. That was the first smart thing he did all day. While we waited, nobody ate. Nobody moved another box. Nobody said the word family again. Roy tried twice to start explaining himself, but I held up one hand and said, "Save it for the deputy." She arrived 11 minutes later. Her name was Deputy Renata Cruz, and she had the calmest eyes I've ever seen on a person wearing a badge. I showed her my license, the property tax bill I kept in my truck folder, and the scanned deed copy on my phone. Roy tried to interrupt her 3 separate times. She let him get about 5 words out each time before saying, "Sir, I'm speaking with the property owner." That sentence did more work than any amount of shouting could have. I walked Deputy Cruz through the cabin, the U-Haul, the boxes, the pantry, the people, the grill. The teenage boy finally took his shoes off my couch without being asked. Then we found the second thing that mattered. On the small desk in the guest room, beside a stack of Roy's fishing magazines, sat an envelope from a utility company, addressed to Roy Sutter at my cabin's address. Deputy Cruz photographed it. Roy's face went the color of old paper. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The room was already speaking for me. Deputy Cruz told everyone present they had to leave, and that returning without written permission from me would risk arrest for trespassing. She took names, she took plate numbers, she gave me a case number. Roy stood in the driveway, while Kyle loaded the boxes back into the U-Haul, the whole time looking at me like I'd somehow betrayed him by treating his own behavior as exactly what it was. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly, once the others were out of earshot. "Nora won't appreciate this." I looked out toward the lake. The water was bright and hard under the sun. "Roy," I said, "the mistake was believing my daughter's marriage handed you a shoreline." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. A locksmith from town arrived before the sheriff's dust had even settled. I'd called him, while the U-Haul was still backing out. He changed both door locks, reset the smart keypad, removed Grant's old code, added a new gate chain, and helped me mount a temporary camera over the front porch. By 5 that afternoon, every old code was dead. Then I called Nora. She answered, cheerful. "Hey Dad, how's the cabin?" I closed my eyes for 1 second. "Honey, did you give Grant the door code?" A pause. "Yes," she said slowly. "Last fall, remember? In case he needed to check the heat during that cold snap." "Why? Did you tell him to pass it to his parents?" "No." Her voice changed on that single word. It got smaller. I told her everything. Not dramatically. Not cruelly. Just facts, vehicles, boxes, U-Haul, pantry, the utility mail, the sheriff, the case number. By the time I finished, she was crying. "I didn't know," she said. "Dad, I swear to you, I didn't know. I believe you. Grant told me his parents wanted to spend a weekend up north sometime. I told him we'd ask you when the time was right. I never said they could go. I never said they could bring anything." "I believe you," I said again. There was a rustling sound, and then her voice moved away from the phone. "Grant, get in here." I almost smiled at that, though there was nothing funny about any of it. If you've ever had to sit with the specific ache of watching your own child realize someone they trusted had quietly betrayed that trust on your behalf, you already know it isn't a clean kind of anger. It's closer to grief. That evening, Aldo the carpenter showed up late, having mixed up the day. He found me sitting on the porch with 2 untouched sandwiches, and Marjorie's cedar chest open beside me. I'd checked it after everyone left. Nothing was missing, but someone had pulled her old quilt out and folded it decoratively on the guest bed, like a display. Aldo stood there a moment, cap in his hands. "Bad day," he said. "It just became a documented one," I told him. He nodded like that, made perfect sense. The next morning I called my attorney, Vivian Marsh. Vivian is 72, wears dark red glasses, and carries the professional warmth of a bank vault. She handled the sale of my company, and all of Marjorie's estate paperwork. I trust her because she doesn't waste words, and she doesn't confuse kindness with weakness. I gave her the case number. I emailed photographs. I sent the utility envelope, which Deputy Cruz had let me keep after photographing it. I told her about Roy's comment that Nora would inherit the cabin anyway. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Dennis, that wasn't a misunderstanding. That was a rehearsal." That was exactly the word. A rehearsal. Over the next week, more pieces surfaced. The utility company confirmed someone had attempted to add Roy Sutter as a mailing contact for service notifications. A local handyman called asking if Mr. Sutter still wanted a quote for bunk beds in the back room. My neighbor, 2 cabins down, Pauline, sent me a photo from the previous Friday showing Roy's SUV parked right at my gate. And Aldo found 2 screws missing from the old wooden sign at the end of the lane, the sign Marjorie had painted herself, Harland Cabin. In the back of Roy's trailer, from what Pauline had seen, there'd been a new sign wrapped in plastic, Sutter Lake Place. When Pauline told me that, I didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. If you've ever had someone try to rename something a person you loved built with their own hands, you already understand that a particular kind of theft doesn't just take property. It tries to erase who made it matter in the first place. I thanked Pauline and wrote it down. When somebody's bold enough to rename what your wife painted with her own hands, they've already moved past asking. They're simply waiting for you to stay too polite to stop them. I was done being polite in ways that only helped the wrong people. Vivian sent certified trespass notices to Roy, Sheila, and Kyle Sutter, and to the 2 other adults named in the sheriff's report. She sent a separate letter to Grant not accusing him, but formally stating he had no authority to grant access to the cabin or share codes with anyone else. She also drafted an invoice for cleaning, lock replacement, camera installation, and damage inspection. It wasn't a fortune, $2,186.40. Enough to be real. Enough to say this was not a family inconvenience. This was unauthorized use of private property. Roy called the day he received the letter. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I let that one go too. On the third call, I answered and said, "You have Vivian's number." He came in hot. "You sent me a bill." "I sent you consequences," I said, "for visiting family, entering my property without permission, bringing a trailer, attempting to use my address, and moving my late wife's belongings." He went quiet at the word wife, not out of respect, out of calculation. "You're going to poison Nora against Grant," he said. "No," I said. "You may have already tried that yourself. I'm protecting her from the fallout. She'll own it one day." "No," I said. "She'll benefit from what I choose to leave her. That is not the same thing as you owning any of it. You can't keep family out forever." I looked through my kitchen window at the maple tree Marjorie had planted the year Nora graduated high school. "Watch me," I said, and hung up. 2 days later, Roy proved he'd learned absolutely nothing. My porch camera alerted my phone at 9:12 on a Saturday morning. I was home in my slippers, the ones Marjorie always called ugly drinking coffee. The screen showed Roy at the gate, his SUV idling behind him. Sheila sat in the passenger seat. The red pickup idled behind them both. Roy punched the old code into the dead keypad. Nothing. He tried again, then grabbed the gate and shook it like a man who genuinely believed iron would eventually respond to entitlement. I called Deputy Cruz's office and gave her the case number. A deputy arrived 19 minutes later. I watched it happen live on my phone, coffee cooling in my hand. Roy argued. Sheila pointed toward the cabin. The deputy pointed toward the road. Roy waved some kind of paperwork around. The deputy shook his head. Then Roy climbed back into his SUV, backed up too fast, and left. That was the first time I smiled through any of it. Not because I enjoyed it, because the system worked the moment I actually used it. On Sunday, Nora and Grant came to my house. Nora hugged me hard in the entryway, and didn't let go right away. Grant stood behind her, looking like a man who hadn't slept properly in a week. Good. Some sleep should be lost when you've handed the wrong person a key. We sat at my kitchen table. I put coffee out. Nobody touched it. Grant went first. "Dennis, I'm sorry." I waited. He swallowed. "My dad asked for the code months ago. Said he wanted to surprise my mom with a weekend up there, if you said yes, and wanted to check the place out first. I told him no. He kept pressing. Said family shouldn't have to beg. I finally gave it to him just to make him stop. That's not an excuse." "No," I said. "It isn't." Nora looked at him, not cruelly, worse. Clearly. Grant nodded. "I know." I asked him one question. "Did you know about the U-Haul?" "No." "Did you know about the utility mail?" "No." "Did you know he was planning to put his own name on my cabin sign?" Grant's face went completely blank. "What?" Nora whispered, "Dad, I told them about Sutter Lake Place." Grant put both hands over his face. That was the moment I stopped being angry at him. Not because he was innocent, he wasn't, but because shame had finally accomplished what advice never could. Nora looked at me across the table. "What happens now?" I'd been waiting for that question. "Now," I said, "we make sure this never happens again." Vivian came to my house the following Thursday with a leather folder and 2 pens. She prefers blue ink because, as she once told me, original signatures should look alive. Nora and Grant arrived separately. I noticed that. I didn't ask which room Grant had slept in the night before. Marriage has doors fathers shouldn't kick open unless someone's genuinely trapped behind one. Vivian walked through the documents slowly. First, the cabin would move into the Colby family trust. I would control it while alive. Nora would have full beneficial rights after I passed, but the property could never be sold, borrowed against, renamed, leased, or transferred without trustee approval. No spouse, in-law, friend, cousin, or family guest would have independent access rights. Use required written permission. Access codes would be individual, logged, and revocable. Second, any future spouse-related claim to the cabin or its proceeds would require a properly drafted postnuptial property agreement with independent counsel on both sides. Grant had already spoken with his own attorney. He'd chosen to sign a written acknowledgement that the cabin was separate Colby family property, and that his parents had no rights to it, present or future. Third, Vivian created a separate education and start-in-life fund for any grandchildren I might one day have. Nora cried when she read that part aloud. Grant did too, though he tried hard to hide it. The fund would not pass through Roy, Sheila, Grant, or even Nora if circumstances ever made that unwise. It would be for the children, clean, protected, patient. There was one more document, a letter to Roy and Sheila, copied through Vivian, stating they were barred from entering the cabin, the lane, the dock, or any Colby Trust property. It included the sheriff's report number, the Saturday gate incident, the invoice, and a payment deadline. Grant read it twice. Then he looked at me. "I'll make sure they pay it." "No," Nora said. We all turned toward her. She wiped her eyes, sat up straighter, and looked at her husband. "They pay it. Not you. Not us. Them." Grant stared at her for a second, then nodded. "You're right. That was the first time I believed they might come out of this stronger than they'd gone in." But Roy wasn't finished. Men like Roy don't accept a closed door until they bruise their own shoulder against it. 2 weeks later, he drove to Green Bay and showed up at Nora and Grant's house. I know, because Nora called me from the upstairs bedroom while Grant kept Roy in the living room. Her voice was shaking with anger, not fear. "He says you're manipulating us," she said. "He says Grant should never have signed anything. What do you want me to do?" There was a pause. Then my daughter said, "Come over. Bring Vivian, if she's available." Vivian was always available for the right kind of trouble. We arrived within half an hour. Roy stood in Nora's living room, red-faced, pointing at Grant. Sheila sat stiffly on the sofa with her purse in her lap like a woman waiting for someone else's storm to pass through. Roy turned when I walked in. "You," he said. "Me," I said. Vivian stepped in behind me, red glasses low on her nose, folder in hand. Roy looked at her and actually laughed. "More paperwork?" Vivian said, "Yes, I have loved very few sentences more in my life." She handed him a copy of the trespass notice, the unpaid invoice, and the camera still from the gate. Then a final letter, informing him that if he contacted Nora or Grant regarding the cabin, the trust, the invoice, or any inheritance matter again, all communication would go through counsel from that point forward. Roy scanned the letter, and the laugh drained off his face one line at a time. "You people are insane," he said. Nora walked down the stairs. She'd been crying, but she was done with that part now. "No," she said, "we're done being useful." Roy turned toward her. "Nora, you don't understand what your father's doing." "I understand exactly what he's doing," she said. "He's protecting something my mother loved from people who tried to put their own name on it." Sheila flinched. That told me she'd known about the sign the whole time. Roy looked at Grant. "Are you going to let her talk to us like that?" Grant stood beside my daughter. Not in front of her, not behind her, beside her. "Yes," he said. One word, maybe the best word he'd ever spoken in his life. Roy's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Vivian tapped the invoice with one polished nail. "Payment is due Friday." Sheila stood and picked up her purse. "Roy," she said quietly, "let's go." He looked around the room, searching for someone who'd hand him back the old rules. Nobody did. They left without slamming the door. That surprised me. But sometimes defeat is too heavy for drama. The invoice was paid by cashier's check 2 days later. The cabin stayed quiet the rest of that summer. In July, Nora and Grant came up with me for a weekend. Grant repaired the loose step by the dock without being asked. Nora cleaned the kitchen and set Marjorie's blue cookie jar back on the counter. I watched her do it from the porch. And for a moment, with the lake bright behind her and her mother's jar in her hands, I had to look away. That evening, we sat outside, as the water went dark, and the mosquitoes came out like tiny tax collectors. Grant stood near the grill, nervous, holding a small paper bag. "I brought something," he said. He pulled out a new wooden sign wrapped in brown paper. My chest tightened before I could stop it. Then he turned it around. It read Harland Cabin. Not new letters, the original name. He'd hired a local painter to match Marjorie's exact style from old photographs. Not perfect, respectful, careful, humble. Nora looked at me. Grant said, "I know I don't get to fix what my dad did with just one sign, but I wanted the right name back where it belongs." I took the sign from him. My hands weren't quite as steady as I wanted them to be. "Get the drill," I said. We hung it together. Out at the end of the lane. Roy and Sheila have never come back. They've never apologized either, but I stopped waiting for that a long time ago. Some people treat apologies like coupons they only offer them when they think there's something in it for them. Grant and Nora are still married. Better, I think, than before, not easier. Better, there's a difference. Grant learned that peace bought by surrendering your own boundaries isn't peace at all. Nora learned that love can forgive a mistake without ever having to pretend it was harmless. And I learned that protecting your family sometimes means building walls sturdy enough that the people you love can finally stop holding the door shut with their own bodies. This story taught me something I still carry with me. The mistake most of us make is believing that boundaries and love are somehow opposites, when the truth is that the clearest boundaries are often the most loving thing you can leave behind for the people you care about. If there's one thing you take from tonight, let it be this. If you have something worth protecting, a place, a business, a piece of your history, put it in writing now, while you're calm, rather than waiting until someone forces your hand. And here's a question worth sitting with tonight. Is there something in your own life you've been letting people quietly assume they're entitled to, simply because you've never said otherwise out loud? The Colby Family Trust is signed, funded, and sitting safely in Vivian's office, with copies in my own safe. The cabin has cameras now, individual access codes, and a gate that makes a genuinely satisfying sound when it swings shut. The grandchildren's fund exists too. No grandchildren yet, but I'm a patient man. Good things, built correctly, can wait. Last October, I drove up alone for the first time since all of it happened. The air smelled like fallen leaves and cold water. I opened the cabin, set my bag down, and walked straight out to the screened porch. Marjorie's rocker sat exactly where it belonged, angled toward the lake. I sat in it with a cup of coffee and listened to the wind move through the pines. Behind me, on the counter, her blue cookie jar sat empty. I smiled at that. A kitchen with an empty cookie jar still says somebody's expected. Just not everybody. Not anymore. I'd genuinely like to know what you think about how all of this played out. Drop a 1 in the comments if you think I handled it exactly right by calling the sheriff immediately. Drop a 2 if you think I should have confronted Roy directly before involving the police. Or drop a 3 if you think Grant should have been held to an even harsher standard for handing over that code in the first place. Tell me where you're watching this from tonight, and what time it is where you are right now. And if you've ever had someone in your own family quietly assume ownership over something that was never theirs to claim, I'd love to hear that story from you too. If tonight's story meant something to you, hit subscribe, because there are more stories like this one coming, about the quiet, patient work of protecting the things and the people that actually matter. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next one. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Green Bay, Wisconsin to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.